All right, so you've got that big meeting coming up about the Glendale Garden Homes redevelopment project. And you want to make sure you're walking in uh, well-informed. It's a tricky situation, really, with passionate arguments on both sides, especially when you consider the impact on the folks living there
Hmm.
and the whole affordable housing puzzle. We got a stack of reports and assessments to help us unpack this, some going all the way back to 2004.
Yeah, you're right. This is a microcosm of so many development debates happening across California right now. It's
Yeah.
balancing the need for housing with preserving community character and making sure everyone has a place they can afford. Tough needle to thread.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly are the Glendale Garden Homes, and why are they at the center of this whole debate?
Hmm. Well, imagine stepping back in time to 1957. The Glendale Garden Homes, or GGH as we'll call them, were built as a classic example of that garden apartment style, which was all the rage at the time. So picture this: low-rise buildings nestled around courtyards with lots of green space woven throughout, kind of a little oasis within the city.
Sounds idyllic, but I'm guessing that Oasis is what's causing some of the tension here, right?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. We've got a whole timeline of reports and assessments, and they paint, well, a bit of a confusing picture. When it comes to GGH's historical value, a 2004 assessment suggested they were likely historically significant,
Oh.
but we're actually missing the full report, so who knows what details are tucked away in there. Then a 2019 assessment argued that GGH wasn't even eligible for historic designation, because by then the garden apartment style had become less unique, and a peer review in 2024 basically just echoed those findings.
So, case closed. Time for the bulldozers.
Not quite. A 2025 staff report actually disagrees with those earlier conclusions, claiming that GGH is a distinctive and rather rare example of this architectural style in Glendale and should be considered for preservation. So that's one of the big sticking points right off the bat. Is GGH a relic of the past or a piece of Glendale's architectural history worth saving?
It's fascinating how much debate there is over a few buildings, really. Okay, so let's get to the heart of the matter. What exactly is the redevelopment proposal on the table?
Well, the developer, Central BWB LLC, wants to replace GGH with a new, denser development, 149 rental units. Now, here's where things get interesting. They're utilizing some state density bonus laws, basically incentives, that let them build more units than zoning would normally allow, in exchange for including some affordable housing.
Hold on, density bonuses. That sounds like something I should understand before this meeting. Can you break that down a bit?
You got it. So California has a major housing shortage. These density bonus laws are a way to encourage developers to build more housing, specifically affordable units. It's a trade-off. Developers get to build bigger projects, and in return, they have to set aside a certain number of units for lower-income residents. But it's not without controversy. Some argue these bonuses just lead to denser, less community-integrated projects that don't truly solve the affordability problem in the long run. That's something you might want to consider as you hear the arguments for and against this project.
Okay, that's definitely helpful context. So 149 units total. But how many would actually be designated affordable under this proposal?
They're proposing 19 dedicated affordable units, 14 for low-income households, and 5 for moderate income.
All right, that's a start. But let's dive into the arguments people are making on both sides of this issue. What are the main points folks are bringing up in favor of this redevelopment?
Well, supporters see this project as a way to address Glendale's pressing housing needs. The city's growing. And they need more housing units, period. Plus, those 19 affordable units are seen as a valuable contribution to the limited affordable housing stock in Glendale.
More housing, more affordable options. What else are they highlighting?
There's also the argument that new development means improved amenities and infrastructure, modern construction, updated features, potentially even a reduced environmental impact with newer, more efficient buildings. Proponents also point to potential economic benefits, construction jobs, increased property values, and possibly even a boost to local businesses.
Okay, so I'm seeing the appeal from that angle, but let's flip the script. What are the concerns being raised by those who oppose the redevelopment?
Well, the biggest one, as we touched on earlier, is the potential loss of a historical resource. Many feel that GGH, as a rare example of this garden apartment style in Glendale, deserves preservation. They worry about the impact on the existing community, too. Increased density could strain things, like roads, parking, and schools. And some worry that the character of the neighborhood would change with a much larger, denser development.
And what about the affordability piece? Even with 19 dedicated units, Are there concerns that it's not enough to offset the potential negative impacts?
Absolutely. Some argue that even with those dedicated units, overall rent increases in the area might actually end up displacing current GGH residents. They point out that 19 units out of 149 is a pretty small percentage, and question whether this project is really a solution to the housing crisis, or just a way for developers to profit while making a small, affordable housing concession.
So there are definitely some valid points on both sides of the equation.
Exactly. And to really understand the weight of these arguments, we need to get specific about how this project might affect the people living nearby. Because let's be real, that's probably what you're most concerned about, as someone who might be impacted by this, right?
Absolutely. Things like traffic, parking, noise, these are the everyday realities people are going to be dealing with if this project moves forward.
Right. You could potentially see increases in all those areas. More residents mean more cars on the road, more competition for parking spaces, and potentially more noise, especially during construction. There's also the question of how this new development would affect the look and feel of the neighborhood. Some might appreciate a modern update, while others might feel it clashes with the existing aesthetic. And then there's the social dimension to consider, too. Will an influx of new residents change the community dynamics? These are all things to weigh as you think about the potential impacts.
So we've got the history, the pros and cons, and the potential neighborhood impacts swirling around in our heads. But to really understand what's at stake here, I think we need to zoom in on the developer's specific plans. What exactly are they proposing? And how does it all fit together?
You're right. The devil's often in the details. The developer's vision is to replace those 3 existing 2-story buildings at GGH with a single, larger structure. This is where those density bonuses we talked about really come into play.
Okay, remind me how those work again, and how they're affecting the scale of this project.
Essentially, Glendale's general plan would typically allow for 87 units on a site this size. But because the developer is agreeing to include those 19 affordable units, they're allowed to take advantage of these state density bonus laws, like SB 1818 and a couple others, which bump them up to 149 units.
So they're getting a bonus of 62 units because of those affordable housing concessions. That's a significant increase.
It is, and it goes back to that core tension we've been discussing. Is this a win-win where we get more housing, including affordable units? Or is it a way for developers to skirt the usual rules and build bigger projects than the community might otherwise accept? It's a question worth pondering.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Now, you mentioned a single larger building. How tall are we talking? Would it tower over the surrounding neighborhood?
That's a key concern for a lot of folks. The proposed building would be 4 stories tall.
Okay, so significantly taller than the existing buildings.
Yeah.
What about parking? With that many new units, won't that put a strain on parking in the surrounding area?
I'm imagining a lot of frustrated neighbors circling the block every night.
That's a common concern with higher density projects, and something the developer has tried to address in their plans. They're proposing a mix of garage and surface parking, aiming for 1 parking space per unit, whether that's enough to meet the actual demand. Especially if residents have multiple cars or guests visiting, is something folks are debating. And with more cars comes more traffic. Has the developer addressed how this influx of new residents will affect traffic flow in the neighborhood?
They conducted a transportation impact analysis, which is pretty standard for developments like this. Their analysis concluded that the project would generate an average of 1,054 daily trips. And because of the site's proximity to major roads and public transit, they argue that the impact wouldn't be too severe. But some residents are skeptical of that conclusion, especially those who live on the streets closest to the project.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears to the environmental impacts. We know demolition and construction can be pretty messy. What's the developer doing to minimize things like waste and pollution?
They've outlined a number of mitigation measures in their environmental assessment. Things like dust control during demolition, proper disposal of construction debris, and making sure they comply with all the South Coast Air Quality Management District's rules. For emissions control, they insist that the project wouldn't exceed regional air quality thresholds. But again, some residents are concerned about those localized on-the-ground impacts, especially during the construction phase.
Right, because even if it's within the legal limits, nobody wants to be breathing in construction dust for months on end. What about noise pollution? That can be a real drag for those living nearby.
Absolutely. The city has noise ordinances that the developer has to follow, which restrict construction hours and noise levels. But even with those rules in place, there's bound to be some level of disruption.
So it sounds like we've got a 4-story building, much denser than what's there now,
Right.
with parking and environmental impacts being major points of contention. What else should we keep in mind as we get ready for this meeting?
I think it's important to remember the bigger context here. This isn't just about one building, it's about Glendale's struggle to balance its growth with the needs of its residents.
And with those 19 affordable units, this project is being framed as a way to address the city's housing shortage and affordability crisis, right?
Exactly. But as we've been discussing, there are strong arguments on both sides. Does this project really move the needle on affordability? Or is it just a drop in the bucket compared to the overwhelming need? Is it a genuine effort to provide affordable housing? Or is it more about maximizing profit? These are the tough questions people are grappling with.
So much to consider. We've covered the history, the plans, the potential impacts, the environmental factors, and the affordable housing debate. Is there anything else we need to add to the mix before we wrap things up?
There is one crucial element we haven't touched on yet. We've talked about the arguments for and against the project, but what about the people who actually live in Glendale Garden Homes? We need to understand how they feel about this, how they'll be impacted, and what their hopes and fears are. Their voices are at the heart of this whole discussion.
You're absolutely right. Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore those personal stories, the potential for compromise, and what this all means for the future of the Glendale Garden Homes community. We spent a lot of time looking at the Glendale Garden Homes redevelopment project from a bird's eye view. The history, the plans, the arguments, but now it's time to get on the ground level, to hear from the people who call GGH home and understand what this project means for their lives.
You're right, it's easy to get lost in the numbers and the big picture debates, but ultimately this is about people's homes, their community, their sense of belonging.
Exactly. So we've gathered insights from community meetings, resident testimonies, local news coverage, trying to capture that human side of the story. And it's safe to say there's a real mix of emotions surrounding this project.
There is, and one of the most prominent emotions is fear, particularly the fear of displacement. Many residents have lived in GGH for years, often paying rents that are, well, below market rate. They're understandably worried that even with those 19 affordable units in the new development, they won't be able to afford to stay in the neighborhood they've called home for so long.
That's got to be a heavy weight to carry. The uncertainty of not knowing if you'll be able to stay in your own home.
Yeah.
It's not just about the financial aspect either, right? It's about the community connections, the support networks, the feeling of rootedness that people have built over time.
Absolutely. Those social and emotional ties are invaluable, and losing them can be deeply disruptive to people's lives. And beyond the fear of displacement, there's also anxiety about how this redevelopment might change the very character of their neighborhood.
We've talked about the increased density and traffic that could come with this project.
Yeah.
How are residents feeling about those potential impacts?
There's definitely a sense of apprehension. Many residents appreciate the quiet, close-knit feel of the existing GGH community. They worry that a larger, denser development will bring unwanted noise, traffic congestion, and a more transient population, ultimately eroding that sense of community they cherish.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? Trying to find that balance between progress, the need for more housing, and the desire to preserve the unique character of a neighborhood and the well-being of the people who live there.
It is a tricky balance, and it's important to acknowledge that it's not all doom and gloom. Not every resident is opposed to the project. Some see the potential for positive changes, especially when it comes to things like upgraded amenities and improved living conditions.
So there's a glimmer of hope amidst the concerns. What are some of the things residents are hoping for with this redevelopment?
Some are optimistic that the new development will much-needed upgrades to their living spaces. They imagine things like modern kitchens, updated bathrooms, and better overall maintenance. They also see the potential for new community spaces and amenities, which could actually foster connections between new and existing residents.
That's a good point. Redevelopment doesn't always have to be negative. It can be an opportunity to improve people's lives and create something even better for the community. Of course, that requires careful planning, genuine community engagement, and a real commitment to addressing residents' concerns.
Couldn't agree more. And that's where the potential for compromise comes in. We've seen examples in other cities where developers have worked closely with residents to find solutions that balance the needs of both sides.
So what could compromise look like in this case? What are some ideas that might address the concerns we've been discussing?
One idea that's been suggested is a phased redevelopment approach. Instead of demolishing everything at once and displacing everyone, the construction could be staggered, minimizing disruption and giving residents more time to adjust. Another proposal is to provide robust relocation assistance to those who are displaced, helping them find comparable affordable housing in the area.
That makes a lot of sense. What about the historic preservation aspect? Are there ways to incorporate elements of the existing GGH into the new design? Kind of a nod to the past as they build towards the future.
There are definitely creative options, perhaps preserving some of the mature trees on the property, or incorporating architectural details from the original buildings into the new design. It could be a way to honor the site's history and create a sense of continuity for the residents.
I love those ideas. It really sounds like there's potential for a win-win scenario here. But it all comes down to open communication, a willingness to listen to all sides, and a commitment to finding common ground.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so crucial for you, as someone who cares about this community, to attend that meeting, be informed, ask questions, and make your voice heard. The decisions being made now will have a lasting impact on Glendale Garden Homes and the people who live there.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored the history, the arguments, the plans, the potential impacts, but most importantly, we've heard the voices of the Glendale Garden Homes community. What's the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with today?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Development doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. With thoughtful planning, genuine collaboration, and a commitment to finding solutions that benefit everyone, we can create a future for Glendale Garden Homes that honors its past, embraces progress, and ensures that all its residents have a place to call home.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Glendale Garden Homes redevelopment project. We hope you feel more informed and prepared to engage in this important conversation that will shape the future of this community.